So let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
The hardest thing to do now and forever and has ever been is to cut spending. When you have tiny margins, you're trying to pass a big bill. I think in the end it will pass, but don't expect it to be as beautiful as the president would like.
But the tax cuts will be permanent, and that'll be key, too. That's the big, beautiful bill. Now, Elon Musk is gone, and he's critical of the big, beautiful bill. DOGE remains, what it all means for Trump's economy and the midterms.
Number 2.
We're going to see where the trail leads, just like we did in the Biden influence peddling investigation. We're going to do the same thing with this auto pen. Who was giving the authority for use of the auto pen?
Nothing but facts. Biden confidants called to Congress to talk about who was really running the country while Biden was president, showing up willingly or whether they show up willingly or court mandated. The political scandal threatens the Dems today and tomorrow.
Number 1.
Harvard has been a disaster. They've taken $5 billion plus. And I'd rather see that money go to trade schools.
Yeah, we'll see if that can be repurposed. War on Harvard getting uglier as the Trump crackdown continues, with the Ivy president speaking out and confessing about the state of his once elite institution. Yeah, they got professors, but there's no diversity of thought. Yes, they do a lot of studies and have respect all around the world, but at what cost? Could we be cost effective elsewhere with just pure labs and no university setting? So the president of the United States says we're going to also examine, should there be thresholds to international students at universities? I think yes. I mean, my goodness, they get 27% of the student body. As many as 32% are from other countries. All right, how about 15? President brought that up. I think it should be a lot less. Also, stop with the biasness. Cut 1.
Harvard has been a disaster. They've taken $5 billion plus. $5 billion. Nobody knew that they were making this cut. If we didn't do this, we would have never found this out, Pam. They're taking $5 billion, and I'd rather see that money go to trade schools.
Yeah, and what happens, Karl Rove told us yesterday, you got to go name the schools and talk about how you're going to repurpose the money, but go and do it. You can't just say what trade schools. As Michael Rose said, too, he said they're all trade schools that aren't great. Find out what the ones they are, good ones are, and you can help that way with blue-collar workers and see if you can repurpose some of that. But still, they're continuing to fight. They're going to court. They'll be in court today trying to get their reinstatement for student visas to be able to issue them and get their new freshman class going and renew the ones that are still there. Alan Garber, the current Harvard president, was on NPR, and he's talking about the fight he's having with Trump. And he did talk openly about the problem they're having with conservatives. Cut 10.
We think it's a real problem if, particularly at research universities, students don't feel free to speak their minds. When faculty feel that they have to think twice before they talk about the subjects that they're teaching, that's a real problem that we need to address. And it's particularly concerning when people who have views that they think are unpopular, and the administration and others have said conservatives are too few on campus and their views are not welcome. Insofar as that's true, that's a problem we really need to address.
Is it true?
I think that we have heard from some people that they do feel that way.
Yeah, people feel that way. So it's a bit of a couch. So they feel they're going to outlast. They're wasting money trying to fight the government. And in the end, they'll lose the American public, even if they win some of the cases along the way. It's a real problem. And Harvard doesn't seem to care or fully understand. Where Columbia says, how do I unfreeze my $400 million? They're saying now, how do I get my $30 billion back? Yeah, the State Department is also now scrutinizing all visa holders associated with Harvard, not just student visas. That includes B1 business visas, B2 tourist visas, and others. It'll be a substantive investigation aimed at identifying potential security vulnerabilities or other abuses of the visa system. This is going to Bill Maloogian. This could potentially impact hundreds of individuals associated with the university. So good job, Harvard. Dig in, get your court order and go to court and realize the American people are fed up with foreigners taking slots at elite institutions. You just want the full freight. No doubt about it. Congressman Gregory Meeks thinks he's on Harvard's side. Cut 8.
This is about retribution. This is about individuals, as we've seen again and again.
universities, law firms, any individual that Trump perceives to be his enemy. It's about retribution. It's about him wanting to be a king. This is a danger and a violation of the Constitution of the United States of America, which does give individuals the freedom of speech.
So this is unbelievable that they still use his terms. If it's not Hitler, they use the term king. So they keep on doing this. He wants to make himself king. No, he doesn't want to put up with anti-Semitism on college campuses. And Congressman Meeks, you said nothing. Senator Schumer, you've said almost nothing. You coach people to keep their mouth shut. And now that the president says, I'm not going to tolerate it, let alone the conservative school of thought, it's crazy. Linda McMahon, who's going to be out on Long Island tomorrow in Massapequa going to bat for the American Indian names like Chiefs and Warriors, she said this about Harvard, cut 7.
The president is looking at Harvard because, I mean, if you think about where did a lot of this anti-Semitism start, or where were the actions that we saw that were covered in the media? Harvard was clearly one of those places. Columbia was the other. The goal really is to have Harvard come to the table. Let's negotiate. Let's work through the things that we have put forward that we believe are going to make things better on the campus of Harvard. We did that with Columbia. I think that we're making great strides.
Yeah, but they're not doing it, so they want to fight it, and we'll see how that goes. Same with CBS and Paramount. They want to fight against the president when the president sued them, when the White House sued them for election bias, for editing and making Kamala Harris seem sane. They offered $15 million. The president said, not enough, I want 25. So the other big question is what's going on with the Democratic Party. Not only where do they go from here, but what's been happening over the last 4 years. Now it seems, and books confirm, that Joe Biden was not in charge. And you look at the left-wing agenda. You look at the amount of pardons that were handed out. You look at the end of natural gas drilling at a critical time of our national security. When you see the Arctic ban on drilling, you wonder, whose idea was that? Was Joe Biden even knowing that he was signing off on it? Here's Congressman Jim Comer, cut 11.
I would say Ron Klain's a very good bet, but again, we're going to see where the trail leads, just like we did in the Biden influence peddling investigation. We followed the money. We found the shell companies. We found the bank accounts. We're going to do the same thing with this auto pen. Who was giving the authority for use of the auto pen? Remember, Sean, there was more activity in the last 100 days of the Biden administration than the first 3.5 years of the Biden administration. Many of the far-reaching executive orders were signed during the last 100 days, and they were all signed by the auto pen. We don't believe that you can sign a legal document with an auto pen. If I issue a subpoena, I have to fly to Washington, D.C. to manually sign my signature on that subpoena. Anything pertaining to the law has to be signed by a person.
That's pretty insane. And I don't know if you could tell the difference with the auto pen, but I would have to go ahead and try to authenticate all of it, that it's Joe Biden's policy. But Joe Biden, is he all there to talk about what he did over the last 4 years? He's been defiant, saying he's never been better, trying to convince everyone that he's fine. Do you think he's going to say, well, I'm dementia ridden and all these people took advantage of me? That's not going to happen. So James Comer said that the Biden White House blocked individuals from providing testimony in the past, but now if they don't show up, he will subpoena them and make them legally bound to show up. Remember, people that didn't show up, some went to prison, like Steve Bannon, for not showing up to testify. So Joe Biden and that scandal, I am looking forward, but I would like to find out who was complicit, because I want to eliminate them from higher office. Alex Thompson, co-author of the big book that's outing a lot of the antics of the administration, was there last night, was on our channel last night, cut 14.
John Anzalonis, who worked with Biden back in 1987 and was the pollster in 2020. He raises concerns about him running for re-election and thinks they should have a real process here. And he basically is told no thanks. And he's not part of the Biden re-elect. I'd say the other thing is that's happened to a lot of people in that world. And I would say the main enforcer of sort of the loyalty principles is Joe Biden and Anthony Bernal. But as a result, people get the memo and people don't speak up because, honestly, I think it's more of a story of cowardice where they feel like they're going to be pushed out. Now, there were small little things done, like, for example, Bob Bauer, Anita Dunn's husband and Biden's longtime lawyer, he They basically secretly had the DNC get a copy of the hard drive from Hunter Biden's laptop, prepare a dossier of sorts of like the most salacious details, and then privately present it to Joe and Jill Biden. And the message was, all of this is going to come out this time. Like, we're not going to,
2024.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to get away with it like we did in 2020. All this, and like, it's going to be very painful.
And it's going to be introduced as evidence in his trial also.
Yes.
Hey, yeah. And by the way, with his son is still a mess. A lot of those financial ties, the cocaine in the White House, all this stuff could be exposed. So how, if he had run and he had won, how would they have done it? Here's more from Thompson of what these people and his sources told him. What would have happened?
There was one person, and I remember it, especially because it was said so casually, where they said, listen, when you, all Biden had to do was win. And then he only had to occasionally come out for an occasional proof of life. And
they used the phrase proof of life.
Yeah. And their rationale was, first, beating Trump, but B, they were like, when you vote for a president, I think most voters understand you're voting for the people around them too.
This is all
that is
stunning, right? All of the interviews for this book took place after the election, except for that one, and it's to me the most stunning because it was not the most stunning. There was a lot of stunning stuff in the book, but just the rationalization of proof of life. Like, what are you talking about? That's not what the job is. You know, I mean, it's something out of like a dystopian Hollywood thriller.
So think about this. These people you probably never heard of are going to be called up, and they're going to be asked to describe what they did. I don't know why they're going to be honest. Joe Biden's not going to come up there and say it's not true. He'll agree with everything if asked. Neera Tanden, we know her. Andy Tomasini, okay, we've seen her. Anthony Bernal, very close to the Biden family for years. And Ashley Williamson was the deputy director of the Oval Office. So she'd be able to comment on things, but I don't expect them to say anything. But what I think is interesting, maybe some direct questions or abstentions from Democrats who don't want to attack because they don't want to defend, they rather attack. They don't want to defend Joe Biden. They don't want that stain on them should they want to seek higher office or their current office. So you don't want to be like, Joe Biden was all in. This is the best version of Joe Biden ever. You will not hear that from anyone not named Jill. Hey, welcome back. Jamie Metzl in studio, former member of the WHO Advisory Committee, former National Security Council official with the Clinton administration and author of Super Convergence. Jamie, we've got so many different places to go, but let's talk about what's happening today. I guess Harvard has a graduation.
Yes.
And we're going to be covering it live, where we expect anti-Semitic protests to rage, anti-Israeli specifically. And a lot of people look at this and understand, and speaking to the hostage lawyers, there's a genesis of Hamas funding and Iran funding that supports some of these 4 Palestinian programs at Harvard.
So I'm on two sides of this issue, proudly. I'm a Harvard alum, and I think Harvard is an incredible institution, and it is a gem of America, and America is a beneficiary of Harvard and everything that it represents. And Harvard and universities like it have a major problem. We have let incitement run amok. We have foreign funding for very destructive behaviors. We have pit one group of students against others. And so this bubble needed to be popped. As I was saying to you, Brian, before we went live, as a Democrat, I wish the Democrats had said, hey, a lot of this stuff is just nuts and we need to go after it. Because the Democrats weren't able to police ourselves, the American public felt they have the Democrats who are just embracing defund the police and globalize the intifada and all these horrible things that the Democrats couldn't fully condemn. And President Trump, who was saying this stuff is a threat to American democracy. And so there wasn't really an option. So I absolutely think that we need to address the kind of incitement to violence and rank anti-Semitism that we are seeing in American universities. I also think that we need to be very careful when we're doing that because our universities have made incredible contributions to our societal, national well-being, our economic well-being, winning wars. All of these kinds of things are connected to our universities. So we can't take a sledgehammer to a problem that's better addressed with a scalpel.
So I think, though, Harvard has themselves to blame, in my view, because Columbia got their $400 million frozen, and they said, what do I have to do to get it back?
Yeah.
And they basically agreed to everything except for the curriculum one, where they feel as though they want to negotiate, which I think is expected. And I can understand both sides of that one. You see this, you wonder if they could balance out some of the curriculum to not be so anti-American when it comes to international studies or however they label it. And Harvard goes, no, we're going to sue you. You know, if you freeze this money, you take this money, you repurpose this money, we're suing you. So the administration goes, okay, we're going to amp this up. And we're going to hold back $50 billion. And by the way, you got a huge endowment. The money that was coming to you, we're going to repurpose to trade schools. Now, there's a way to do that. That's interesting. And then are you entitled as a university to get grants from the federal government? That's what a judge is going to ultimately decide. Here's what President Trump also said about the fact that between 27 and 32% of the student body is from another country. Cut 3.
We want to be able to see why, these countries aren't helping us. They're not investing in Harvard and all of our, we are. I think, number one, I think they should have a cap of maybe around 15%, not 31%. We have people who want to go to Harvard and other schools. They can't get in because we have foreign students there. But I want to make sure that the foreign students are people that can love our country.
Is there anything he said you can't sign on to?
I'm not sure I would sign on to a specific percentage. I agree that American universities should prioritize educating Americans. But America has been a huge beneficiary of getting the best and brightest students from other places coming here and then moving here and living their lives here. And most of Silicon Valley is people exactly like that. Either it's refugees like Sergey Brin or people who came here to study and stayed on. So we are beneficiaries of this system. But absolutely, we should be filtering out. If there are people who are either members of communist parties elsewhere or people who are coming to our campuses and they are calling to globalize the Intifada or do all of these things supporting designated terrorist organizations, like we should have no room for that. So we do need to do a better job of screening, but I wouldn't support specific quotas.
I think it would be great. Also, no one brings this up, but as a sports team, I'm watching Division I soccer. Yeah. There's no Americans. You got 25-year-old freshmen from other countries. I'm thinking to myself, who are you rooting for? So it's like, well, I love that university, really, because they just transferred over here. They couldn't get in the Premier League. And I'm watching, maybe it's the same thing with basketball, too, to a degree, but there's more American basketball players. So
yeah, but that'll make us better. I mean, I just feel like, I'm originally from Kansas City. When I was a little kid, I used to say, well, how many members of the Chiefs are from Kansas City? I want to be part of the team where all the players come from Kansas City. It helps us in the United States. If we want to be great at soccer, let's bring the best soccer players to come here and play, and let's bring up our
But they're taking the spots of American kids.
Yeah, but
I'd rather American kids have a chance to compete than a 23-year-old.
Yeah, but half of the U.S. World Cup team are people who came here.
Those
as
are
students.
Americans.
Yeah, there's students, but also people coming. It's great for America if amazing people from other countries come here, get educated, move here, build their lives here, have kids here who play soccer like their parents from Argentina or Colombia. I think that's the story of America. And I think if we become too rigid, but for sure, if there are people like is happening with some students from China, some of the definitely pregnant women flying to Los Angeles to give birth in Los Angeles to get. I mean, there are real problems. People are
birthright citizenship.
Yeah, people are exploiting.
Which is, I can't believe both parties can't get on board that. Yeah. That's not what it was meant to do. It was not, and people are abusing that.
People are finding loopholes in our system, and we need to say, here's what we are for. And I'm just worried that, well, we have to identify problems and address them. If we take a sledgehammer to all of these problems and do too much damage to our educational system and other systems, it's going to be very, very difficult to build. These things take decades, centuries to build, and they can be destroyed very quickly.
So Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this: the U.S. will begin revoking visas of Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. Under President Trump's leadership, the U.S. State Department will work with the Department of Homeland to revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections, as I mentioned. He goes on to say, we will revise visa criteria to enhance scrutiny of all future visa applications from the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong, which is now one and the same. How do you feel about that?
Well, we have some incredible young people from China, from Hong Kong in our universities who are contributing massively to scientific research, to all aspects of,
and sending it back
academic
to China.
Life. We also have people who are coming from China, who are stealing things, who are intimidating. There's massive
Stanford
intimidation
had a big story.
I mean, everywhere. I mean, massive intimidation of other students by students from China connected to the Chinese Communist Party who are spying on other students and reporting back. I am all for screening students who aren't working, so to prevent students from coming here under the guise of education and working as agents of foreign governments. But we also need to recognize, again, America is a huge beneficiary of the inflow of students. We actually have a problem of kicking out too many students who are coming here to study. But I think it's a healthy impulse to say we need to be mindful.
China, in that the story is when they come over here, even if they're the most well-meaning, their families are behind, and they threaten the families if the kids do not, the students do not produce.
It's that is a vulnerability. We need to address that vulnerability.
Do you like the way he's addressing it?
I don't like it. I think it's too broad. I think we should say, here's the specific problem, and here's how we're going to address it specifically.
But this is the problem, and this is how he's going to address it. He's going to address every visa. So they have 240,000 Chinese students.
Yeah. So, but I think, for example, when people apply for these visas, there are a series of questions that you ask, and one is, have you ever been a member of a communist party?
Everybody has, and in China.
Well, not everybody, but a lot of these people. But I think maybe you should say there should be more questions but I think we could ask, for example, have you ever supported in any way, including on social media posts, a U.S. designated terrorist organization? So all these kids, because we had this mania of globalize the Intifada who posted on social media, they're all racing, which is healthy actually, to erase their inciting to violence social media posts. I do think we should screen. But again, if we just say we're against Chinese students as a broad category, we're going to do a lot of harm to ourselves. We need to say this is the problem that we're trying to address, and we're going to address it narrowly.
But do you, with that, I say the same thing, farmland. You're buying farmland in America, you got to be no. When you buy land near military bases, it's got to be no. I don't need any ramp up. I don't need to be if you're Chinese or Russian, because we can't have that.
We've let our openness be used against us, and we had this fantasy. I mean, I served in the Clinton administration, but I think the Clinton administration did a terrible thing. It was a huge error to let China into the WTO without sufficient conditionality, and certainly. Democrats and Republican administrations didn't do enough to hold China accountable. But yes, these things are kind of obvious that we need to be protecting against our adversaries, and the governments of China and Russia are our enemies.
So let's talk about anti-Semitism. You just told me the couple that was gunned down just from going to that Jewish event in Washington, D.C. They were a future couple about to be engaged. Right. One of them was a friend of your family?
Yeah. Well, her father was a close friend of my father's. I come from Kansas City. I live in New York now, but I come from Kansas City originally. And we have a pretty tight-knit Jewish community there. And her father was a biking partner of my father, my late father, for decades. And so I knew everybody here. And it's just so and this young woman, Sarah Milgram, was just incredible. I mean, she was so committed to coexistence. The actual meeting that she was attending, which is organized by the American Jewish Committee, was an interfaith meeting about how to get food to the people of Gaza. And this murderer, who was somebody who was he was an American citizen who was incited by all this incendiary language of murder, which has become commonplace on American campuses. These kids who are saying globalize the Intifada, or from the river to the sea, or free Palestine by any means necessary.
And he yelled at free Palestine.
Yeah, these kids are calling for murder. And so incitement to murder isn't speech. It is action. And there is a clear result of this madness with the tragic death of Sarah and Yaron.
And absolutely. And by the way, he was a Christian. So
yes.
This guy was proud of it. He goes, I'm not armed, come get me. And people think he's a hero. And this guy was part of a group that was financed by China. China was one of the financing of this group in Chicago. It's crazy.
China, Russia, Qatar are funding divisiveness in our society. If we let them, if we say, all right, and now the Trump administration is saying we don't want to have any regulation of social media, where this is happening is on social media. So if we're saying there can be no governance of social media, and China, Russia, and Iran are using social media as the exact vehicle for creating these kinds of divisions.
I mean, they just get directly in touch with them. I don't even think they need to see a post on Meta or Facebook. But what I'm saying is we have to be smarter about the things I just mentioned, about the farmland, about the military bases, about wondering who's coming here, and then also about these groups. Excuse me, when we were cracking down, when it was the war on terror, first thing we did is try to unwind Hamas, right? And try to find out who's funding Hamas and Hezbollah here. We did a great job with accountants, forensic accountants.
We need to do.
We could do that and go right back to the head of the spear.
We should. And President Trump, to his credit, previously talked about Qatar as one of the spigots for funding for this extreme.
How do you view Qatar?
I think I have a lot of questions about Qatar, the funding for extremism around the world. So I'm extremely cautious. I have a higher view of the United Arab Emirates by far than Qatar, and I'm deeply concerned if the President of the United States is getting a $400 million plane, because we should be actually the same criteria that we're saying we should apply to China and Russia, which we haven't. We should also apply to Qatar. And I just think that America needs to wake up that the world that we are facing now is a much more dangerous world. And we had these, in retrospect, fantasies of openness, that openness and liberalism would embrace everybody and we'd all kind of come together. And certainly China and Russia and others have used our openness against ourselves. And so the challenge for us is, how do we protect our system of values and our system of governance while we fight against these adversaries?
Patriot Act. And people are upset about the Patriot Act, but that's what George Bush put in place. Jamie Metzl's here. A couple more minutes when we get back, including, was Joe Biden ever in charge of his administration? Hey, we are back. So we're going to talk to Jamie Metzl just about where his party is right now, the Democratic Party, in light of the Jake Tapper book and Alex Thompson book that reveals more details about President Biden really not being in charge, not even cabinet secretaries, no one really able to get to Biden. And now we have a bunch of people trying to spin their way out of it. Pete Buttigieg, who grew a beard, I guess, and wants to remake himself, was asked this, cut 12.
What do you think y'all should have done differently?
One, for the love of God, figure out a way to get the schools open sooner. Obviously, pay more attention to the border. That's real, and that's going to be something that you can't just take your time to deal with. Three, even though you spent your entire political lifetime believing that the economy and jobs are the same thing, remember that prices is just as big a part of the economy. It just hasn't come up much in the last 40 years.
So what do you think of Mayor Pete? He says that the economy, I guess, the Bidenomics wasn't working, the border should have been closed and wasn't, and schools should have been open sooner. If I asked him that in 2021, Jamie, he would have said, the border's fine. The schools need to be open. Got to be careful. And he would have said the economy's doing great. Just look at the numbers.
You know, certainly looking back, there are a lot of lessons, and I agree with most of what Mayor Pete said. And for
wish
all
you would have done something different.
For all of us in life, we're learning as we go. I think that our economy is better off now than it was then. I think we're actually, for a number of reasons, worse off now. But as I was saying to you in the break, Brian, I think the Democratic Party must do a deeply critical reckoning. We didn't do enough. Our party didn't do enough on the border. All of the Americans were watching the chaos, recognizing the threat. Certainly on prices.
We flew the drones.
Yeah.
We saw the invasion. It was an invasion.
It was insane. And so absolutely that's correct. And as you and I were saying in the break, the biggest thing, as I see it, was the madness of putting a candidate forward, allowing a candidate going certainly for re-election, who just by any measure shouldn't have been.
But you know why they did that? Because they said a diminished Biden is better than a 50-year-old Kamala Harris.
Well, so the Biden people, and I knew this then, were spreading the rumor, you have to stick with Biden. They were saying because Kamala Harris isn't capable of doing this job. And that, if they thought that, what that means is Biden a year before should have said, I'm not seeking re-election. We're going to have an open primary. And the Democrats, we have incredible young people. Wes Moore, my friend, the current governor of Maryland, is incredible. The Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, we could have had a competitive primary, and somebody, maybe Kamala Harris, maybe somebody else, could have taken the mantle. This was really a crime.
But it wasn't just Jamie. It just wasn't the Bidens. Everybody was protecting him. And when RFK jumped in, they told him get out. And when Dean Phillips walked in, they said you're an embarrassment.
Dean Phillips is a hero. I mean, and that's so. As I told you in the break, Brian, I organized a petition. I was many years ago. I was the deputy staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when Joe Biden was chairman and Tony Blinken was director.
Real quick, yeah.
And I organized a petition of former Biden staffers saying you cannot seek re-election. This is a threat to America.
You were always saying that. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Brian.
Mark Goldfeder is the director of the National Jewish Advocacy Center. Mark, what's your take on Harvard suing back the administration for clamping down on the anti-Semitism?
Their hubris, good morning, Brian, their hubris is just unbelievable. They're doubling and tripling down on the notion that they should not have to abide by standard civil rights laws that apply to everybody. The sense of entitlement is insane. You aren't entitled to billions of dollars in federal funds. This is not the government redistributing money that is owed to Harvard. This is recouping money that Harvard took under false pretenses. When they signed their Title VI compliance letters every single year, they said we're going to abide by all of the regulations, including the regulations about not fostering anti-Semitic sentiments on campus.
And Mark, I know you represent Mark and Sarah Yaron's memory. You represent some of the hostage families who are suing because these organizations aren't like the Kiwanis Club. You believe they're financed from outside our borders. What should we know about these so-called Palestinian organizations that people like Kilmeade Show was a part of and led?
Well, taking a step back for a second, there has to be a better understanding of anti-Semitism. If you take a look yesterday at the case Mahmoud Khalil, so he was the Columbia student who was deported. He led the CUAD, the Columbia University Apartheid and Divestment, one of the most effective propaganda arms of Hamas. One of our former hostage clients, Shlomi Ziv, told us that when he was in Hamas captivity, his captors would brag to him about, and I'm quoting here, their Hamas operatives on U.S. campuses. And they would show them pictures in particular of the Columbia encampment. So thank God, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that this person being in the country implicates foreign policy interests. Yesterday, Judge Michael Fabriaz said that, well, he doesn't really understand how fostering anti-Semitism affects foreign policy interests. Well, Brian, it's because they are literally sponsored by Hamas, which is funded by Iran and Qatar and all these other foreign policy interests. Of course, it affects American foreign policy. That's why, by the way, that the State Department actually has a special envoy for anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is not a local problem it's a global problem. And we need to understand it that way if you want to understand the effect that these groups are having on our country.
So I look at the assassin from last week. This guy's part of an organization in Chicago that the Chinese partly financed.
Yeah. And, as that article pointed out, we have to take seriously when people call for globalizing the Intifada. Look, it's not just about the Jews and it's not just about anti-Semitism. Of course, it's also about China. This is really what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. They're the canary in the coal mine of intolerance. Anti-Semitism is a wedge issue to get into this country. And you don't have to ask me. It didn't take long for the chance to morph from death to Israel to death to America, and from desecrating Hillel houses and menorahs on campus to destroying the George Washington statue and the Freedom Bell in Washington, D.C. They're coming for the entirety of our Western culture, and they're coming for all of America. And they're not shy. Just ask them.
So, Mark, when you took this case, did you know instinctively or through sources that there'll be an international connection to these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas organizations?
Yeah, we had been tracking this for about a year and a half already. We filed a similar case in the Eastern District of Virginia last year. Look, there has been a tremendous amount of smoke for many, many years. You can see the influence coming back and forth across the country. But what happens is when you hire these young, useful idiots to be your PR agents, you get young, useful idiots who are your PR agents, and they made mistakes after October 7th. They said things like, this is a quote from their manifesto, "We are operating under a unified command of Hamas in Gaza." That's really all you need to know. That was the Students for Justice in Palestine. On October 7th in the afternoon, early morning of October 8th, they released a toolkit, a manifesto, a plan of attack that literally called themselves not in solidarity with this movement, part of this movement. And they used the same language that the killer used last week. Everything resistance is justified by any means necessary, globalize the intifada, etc.
So are you surprised from your profession, the legal profession, that a judge said is probably not constitutional for the president's administration to take Mahmoud Khalil and detain him in an ICE facility? They probably says, you could try to expel him, but he's going to get his day. He's going to get his hearing, but you can't hold him up. Your thoughts about that?
It took me a little bit, but I read the entire 106-page opinion, and I can tell you it's sad more than anything else. It shows a complete lack of understanding of the nature of this problem and the seriousness with which you should take what's happening here. The core part is, he says, the Secretary of State's determination that there is a foreign policy interest here. He doesn't see it. Well, first of all, he doesn't have to see it. The Secretary of State is the one that Congress empowered to make that determination because he has more information, obviously, than this judge does. But, it's a complete failure to understand that international movements like the BDS movement, like the foreign terrorist organizations, directly fuel domestic anti-Semitism and vice versa. It's just a very narrow viewpoint that is unfortunately what leads to Jews being shot in the streets.
I mean, put it this way, Mark. Let's just think logically. Even without the ties and the proven connections, the day after the October 7th attacks, there were protests in Times Square against Israel. They didn't even start hitting back yet. So why are you not protesting for Israel after you're putting babies in ovens, chopping off heads of people, but they're protesting against the reaction before there was a reaction? But somebody actually beat you to the punch when it comes to anti-Semitism on campus. It was Andy McCarthy. Here's what the former Southern District of New York prosecutor said.
The most important project that the Muslim Brotherhood has ever had in the United States was the Muslim Students Associations, which were begun with just really a handful of campuses in the Midwest in the 1960s. They have grown in the ensuing 60 years to the point where they have multiple chapters on almost every United States and Canadian college campus. And they're basically a factory for Sharia supremacist and anti-Semitic literature. I mean, that's basically what it's all about. So they've been spewing this stuff out for 3 generations.
2 years ago.
He's 100% correct. They're masters of propaganda. In 1988, when they started a lot of these American groups, and then in 1993 at the Philadelphia conference, where the FBI got recordings, they said, we're going to put these people in place. We're going to use propaganda. We're going to say one thing in English and one thing in Arabic. We're going to make sure that people don't understand what we're doing. They said that war is deception. We have all of these recordings. It's why the FBI won't work with CARE anymore, because they were unindicted co-conspirators in the largest terror financing case in U.S. history. And unfortunately, they've gotten very good at hiding their tracks. To some extent, thankfully, when they took a little step too far with SJP and those other student groups, because now it's been exposed.
Mark, lastly, it's a terrible product. Oppression. They're impoverished. They have a rhetoric that just basically says kill, kill, kill. What is the attraction? It's hard enough to get a college kid to do anything, let alone join this terrorist organization. Especially if they're an elite institution, it's counterintuitive to think that somebody who's intelligent with resources goes, oh, that Hamas movement is singing my song. How do they sell it?
It's a great question. They play on the naivete of these people, and it's a much broader question. Take a step back for a second. How in the world could people defend someone like Mahmoud Khalil, who's been literally fomenting all kinds of unrest? It's because they pretend it's all about speech, and they refuse to look at the actual facts on the ground, at the incitement, the arson, the trespass, the destruction of property, the concealment of weapons, all kinds of things, actual crimes. They only want to talk about it at this 50,000 foot level. They do the same thing when they talk about Hamas. They're not talking about the fact that Hamas literally throws gays off of the rooftops or that the women are brutalized. They don't talk about any of the lack of freedoms. They talk about Hamas as if it's some kind of utopic, paradise in the Middle East. They refuse to look at the facts on the ground. So when you tell people these naive stories and you refuse to show them the facts, whether it's here or whether it's in the Middle East, they get confused. And preying on useful idiots is a tactic that unfortunately works.
There's a story today that one of the hostages said that as soon as Trump got elected, the Hamas started treating them better because they fear Trump, because they know Trump wanted to get the hostages out. They said they stopped denying us food and water and stopped spitting in our faces and doing horrendous things. So does that line up with what you've been hearing?
100%. Peace through strength is the operative model, and it works.
What changes now that Mohammed Sinwar is as dead as his brother?
It's hard to really say because it's hard to understand who is even making decisions. If they had any sense of logic, none of this would be happening. And so presumably there's another person who's willing to step up, and hopefully they have some, even semblance of self-preservation that they make a deal and get out. Yeah, well, let's see. His name is Omar Shem Tov, and that's what his account was. And he said it on CNN, so I'm sure they were tempted to blot it out and not re-air it, but we are able to get that the verbatim anyway. And Mark, thanks so much. You're representing what family now? We're representing about 35 different hostage families, and the lawsuit says what? And the lawsuit says that a number of these groups, including Students of Justice in Palestine, Columbia University Apartheid, and Divest, are actually functioning as the PR agents of Hamas on U.S. campuses. And where's the case now? The one in Virginia has been fully briefed and is just waiting on a judge to decide on the motions. And the one in the Southern District of New York, we're still waiting for a response. Got it. Mark, thanks so much. Appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much for having me.